Brilliant. Oh, wow, that was good, wasn't it? I'm not sure we need a sermon after that time of worship. We might as well keep going with it. Well done, band. That was fantastic. Well, it's been one of those weeks this week, I think, here at the Eden Centre, where we've just been strife with sickness, and I'm sure a lot of us have already seen there's a horrible bug going around, and we're experiencing it. And, we're here in the Lord's house. It's going to be a good evening. It's been fantastic so far. I'm just going to pray to open up. When we open the Bible, it's so important to do so. Father, thank you for the opportunity to be able to spend time together tonight and to sit in your word and see what you're trying to say to us. I pray you give us open hearts, ready for what's going to be said, and to allow ourselves to listen and let it kind of input us and touch us. We pray for our brothers and sisters that aren't able to be here tonight, and we lift them up to you. But thank you for this evening, and thank you for the opportunity to listen to your word. In your powerful and precious name, Lord. Amen. Got a little bit of feedback. Am I holding this too close? Good? Cool. Tonight we're at the second to last of the series, where we're looking at a new type of love, which is called philia. I think there's a graphic. There we are. I have been making these each week, so you can thank me at the end if you want with the pronunciation, but you don't have to. Thanks, Clive. Yes, so philia love, pronounced philia. This is the type of love this is the type of love in the Bible that most Christians practice towards each other. This Greek term describes the powerful and emotional bond seen in deep friendships. Now, I started doing a bit of study on this, trying to look at it, trying to see what I felt like the Lord was telling me about it. Every day when I go out and teach, Pete has the, I would say privilege, but he would say annoyance of having to take me, because as most of you know, I do not drive. So he's heard me backwards and forwards all week trying to work out what's been the right thing to say about this, what's been the right passage to look at, and what the Lord's been trying to say. But I did a bit of study, and what I found about the word philia is that in the definition of the word, sometimes it is also described as the complete opposite of phobia. Now, I love that straight off the bat. I think that is such a cool little bit of information, because I think it's quite symbolic. As phobia is one of the things, if not the thing, we fear most. And the opposite of that is the thing that we feel most comfortable with. And I think that is such a good image for us as we look into... So I've been told to lift this higher. Is that better? Sorry those on the live stream that couldn't hear that first 5 minutes, but you didn't miss much. I think that is so symbolic as we look at this type of love and what it means, because to be the thing that you're most comfortable with is such a... And that, for that type of friendship and that type of love to be something you're so comfortable with, I think is just a fantastic image. I'm going to share with you a little story. I've been given some notes on how to preach well, and hopefully they rub off, but they probably won't. We'll see how we get on. And that is to share a couple of anecdotes. So the first thing I want to share about, and I have asked, is my now brother-in-law, who used to be my best friend. I'm only joking if you're watching. You still are a good friend of mine. And I had quite a unusual start to becoming friends, and it's one I want to share with you. I mentioned briefly in the week before last when I was preaching about brotherly and sisterly love, that before I went off to Bible college, I went off to uni, and I had a bit of a time where I just completely drifted away from God. We had some stuff that went on in our family that was quite saddening, some deaths, and just an amalgamation of a real struggle of a timeline for us meant that I just kind of walked away from it, and I just put my hands up and said, I just can't look at this right now. And I met Jacob, who's my now brother-in-law, just before going off to uni. He was doing an internship at the church that my father used to be the minister at, and I got to know him first when he was in my kitchen, and I immediately thought, not for me, not for me. And he knows that I would say that about him. But ultimately, I think I have so much to thank him for the way he pulled me through when I didn't even want to stand up when it came to my faith. He would not let me go. He chased after me, which is why I found that song so powerful this evening. And he just pulled me through the mud that I felt like I was walking through with my faith. And it was that friendship that really brought me back to going off to Bible college, to then working in the church, and to coming where I am now. So I don't think I tell him this enough, but honestly, that friendship was everything for me. Because that friendship is what pulled me back and brought me into my faith, to engage with it and to be closer to the Lord and to be pushing in the right direction again. Thankfully, during my first year at Bible college, I was asked to do some kids' work for a retreat that ended up being for the church that was actually Ellie's at the time. Her family were going through some stuff, and Ellie and I ended up meeting on the last night of that retreat. And again, I wasn't planning on going to it. I had no plan on being there. Ellie and I always talk about this, and we can just see the Lord's hand in it so much. But again, Jacob was leading worship for the event, pulled me through, got me working, along with another friend of mine, and that's where I met Ellie. So I also have him to thank for that as well. The better part of Benelli, as I say she is. So he's been there right at the beginning for me in this new kind of era I went through with really pushing into my faith and just letting the Lord see what he wanted to do with it. So tonight's passage, we're going to be looking at 1 Samuel chapter 18. And it's a fantastic passage, chapter, and chapter 19 and 20, I could be preaching on all three of these chapters, but for the sake of your ears and your time, I decided just to stick to the one chapter of 30 verses today. It should be up on the screen, and I'm going to read it through. So if I read too quickly, I do apologize, but it's up there. Saul's growing fear of David. After David had finished talking with Saul, Jonathan became one in spirit with David, and he loved him as himself. From that day, Saul kept David with him and did not let him return home to his family, and Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as much as himself. Jonathan took off the robe he was wearing and gave it to David, along with his tunic and even his sword, his bow, and his belt. Whatever mission Saul sent him on, David was so successful that Saul gave him a higher rank in the army. This pleased all the troops and Saul's officers as well. When the men were returning home after David had killed the Philistine, the women came out from all the towns of Israel to meet King Saul with singing and dancing and joyful songs, and with timbrels and lyres. As they danced, they sang, "Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands." Saul was very angry. This refrain displeased him greatly. They have credited David with tens of thousands, he thought, but me with only thousands. What more can he get but the kingdom? And from that time on, Saul kept a close eye on David. The next day, an evil spirit from God came forcefully on Saul. He was prophesying in his house while David was playing the lyre, as he usually did. Saul had a spear in his hand, and he hurled it, saying to himself, "I'll pin David to that wall." But David eluded him twice. Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with David, but he had departed Saul. So he sent David away from him and gave him command over 1,000 men. And David led the troops in their campaigns. In everything he did, he had great success, because the Lord was with him. When Saul saw how successful he was afraid of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David, because he led them in their campaigns. Saul said to David, "Here is my older daughter, Merab. I will give her to you in marriage. Only serve me bravely and fight the battles of the Lord." Saul said to himself, "I will not raise a hand against him, Let the Philistines do that." But David said to Saul, "Who am I? And what is my family or my clan in Israel that I should become the king's son-in-law?" So when the time came for Merab, Saul's daughter, to be given to David, she was given in marriage to Adriel of Melahah. Now Saul's daughter Michal was in love with David. And when they told Saul about it, he was pleased. "I will give her to him," he thought, "so that she may be a snare to him, and so that the hand of the Philistines may be against him." So Saul said to David, "Now you have a second opportunity to become my son-in-law." Then Saul ordered his attendees, "Speak to David privately and say, 'Look, the king likes you, and his attendants all love you. Now become his son-in-law.'" They repeated these words to David, but David said, "Do you think it is a small matter to become the king's son-in-law? I'm only a poor man and little known." When Saul's servants told him what David had said, Saul replied, "Say to David, 'The king wants no other price for the bride than 100 Philistine foreskins, to take revenge on his enemies.'" Saul's plan was to have David fall by the hands of the Philistines. When the attendants told David these things, he was pleased to become the king's son-in-law. So before the allotted time elapsed, David took his men with him and went out and killed 200 Philistines and brought back their foreskins. They counted out the full number, wouldn't like that job, to the king, so that David might become the king's son-in-law. Then Saul gave him his daughter Michal in marriage. When Saul realized that the Lord was with David, and that his daughter Michal loved David, Saul became still more afraid of him, and he remained his enemy the rest of his days. The Philistine commanders continued to go out to battle, and as often as they did, David met with more success than the rest of Saul's officers, and his name became well known. I love that passage. Obviously, it gets a bit giggly at the end, so for those of you, we'll leave it at that. But no, I love that passage. I think it's so good because I think what's happening so well there is it is showing this continued timeline of David and how he's in this place where even while he's succeeding, he still has people at him with a battering ram trying to break him down. And when we look at the story of Jonathan and David, we see a friendship bond that is so strong that it is like a brotherly bond. Jonathan was ready to take up the mantle and save David, even though he knew this was the person who would be taking his literal birthright. Their bond and their friendship meant more to Jonathan than his birthright. The main difference from what I found between Phila and Storge love is that as Christians, we become brothers and sisters through Christ. I've lost my place now. But we are already family through the normal route with Storge love. Jonathan and David's friendship is one of the most popular in the Bible, and the story itself, like I said earlier, spans over 3 chapters. But in the very first verse in chapter 18, it says this: "After David had finished speaking with Saul, the souls of Jonathan and David were knit together, and Jonathan loved him as himself." I love this verse as it perfectly sums up their friendship. And actually, what this verse does is it's almost poetic, because in chapter 19, we see Saul give David such a hard time. He ridicules him, he pulls him down, he tries to really break him down. But actually, by the end of chapter 20, their friendship is still standing strong. And what's happening in that verse is that it is foreshadowing what happens at the end of chapter 20. And it's just a brilliant, brilliant verse. Chapter 2 then goes on and says that Saul kept David away from his family and did not let him return. We've got some people giggling in the background. They still can't get over that I said that on the stage. I wonder if it was an image of something to come. If Saul kept David around as he thought he may be useful for his plans of deceit, and ones that went against the very nature of what God wanted to do with Saul. Imagine being David in this place. No one, by himself, essentially a captive in a foreign land. And then Jonathan comes along. And he shows you an immense kindness. He shows you an immense friendship. I imagine at that time, David probably broke down with happiness. He's in this place where he is a foreigner, and he's ridiculed, and he's beaten, and he's put down by the king. And the king's son comes up to him and says, "All right, mate, we're going to be best friends." Imagine being David in that place when someone comes up and says that to you. How powerful, how heartwarming, and how immensely happy that would make you. Jonathan made a covenant with David, this is verse 3, because he loved him as himself. And Jonathan removed his robe, the robe he was wearing, and gave it to David, along with his tunic, his sword, his bow, and his belt. On Tuesday night in the prayer meeting, we were looking at some of the previous preachers from this sermon series we've been doing, and somebody quite rightly mentioned that when I was preaching the week before last on the prodigal son, there was a bit where it talks about the father, you'll enjoy this bit, Clive, wrapping his son in his robe, and what the actual significance of that meant. And what that meant was that the father was putting the son under his protection straight away. We see that in here as well. In verse 4, and Jonathan removed the robe he was wearing and gave it to David. Jonathan is putting his protection around David in a place where he is sought after to be killed. He is, every turn he makes, they are waiting for him to make a mistake. And Jonathan, the king's son, wraps him in his protection and says, "Not on my watch. I'm not having that." I just love that image. I just think it's so powerful. And from verses 5 to 18, we see the envy that Saul develops for David. He seems quite petty, to be honest, because in verses 7 to 9, it says this: Saul has slain his thousands and David his tens of thousands. And Saul was furious and resented the song. They have ascribed tens of thousands to David, he said, but only thousands to me. What more can we have? What more can he have but my kingdom? And from that day forward, Saul kept a jealous eye on David. Talk about cutting hairs. They're giving him all this praise for bringing down these Philistines, and yet he's still saying it's not enough. He's got more than me. I want it is, not mine. That's not fair, is it? Saul gets to the point where he even gets annoyed about chants because he's that threatened by David. And yet, imagine being Saul and how angry you would be that you hate this person this much and your son's best mates with them. And your son loves them to bits and doesn't want you to do any harm to them. Once again, we see the importance of Jonathan and David's friendship. And once again, we see how Jonathan is risking everything to go against his dad's wishes and be friends with David. Filial love gets us through the toughest times, like Jonathan and David's friendships. And like my friend Jacob and mine, I was struggling, I couldn't be bothered, I was lying about going to church with my parents, I was just not interested. And the moment I got to this point where I knew I wasn't living in the right place, and I pulled it back, I stripped it right back, came back from uni, said to Mum and Dad, I'm done with that, can't continue with that. And the moment I came back, he'd met me once, he pulled me straight in. He surrounded me. He didn't let me do things that I would be doing previously because he knew those things weren't going to help me and they weren't going to help me get back on fire with God. It's all about the people you're with, but also the way that people mentor, disciple, and lead you into the right place. If our friendships aren't doing that, who's your Jonathan or who's your David, depending on how you take that passage? Who is the person that pulls you up, sits you up, and says, you're hanging out with me this weekend. You're not going anywhere because I know what you're going to do, and that's not right. So you're going to come and be bored with me, but at least you're with me. No, I'm joking. You're going to come to the pub with me. You're going to come watch the football with me. I don't know. But who is the person that shows you that feel of love, shows you that Christian friendship? I know we all have them, and if we don't, I'm open if anybody needs a friend. Point 2, feel of love and how it can build bridges. I know for me, when I was struggling, I felt like I couldn't turn to my family. I felt like the way I was living and the stuff I was doing, I was almost too ashamed to go back to my family at that point. So I needed to go back at the right time. Didn't have to be perfect, but I had to wait until I was ready. Having my friendship with Jacob meant that I had someone I could talk to and hang out with and share with. And I wonder if the lack of family for David meant that his friendship with Jonathan was even more important to him. Through verses 10 to the end of the chapter, we see Saul's frustration and anger with David bubble and grow until eventually trying to kill David multiple times. Basically, the whole of chapter 19, we see Saul try numerous amount of times to kill David or prevent David from doing what he needs to do. Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with David, but had departed from him. In verse 12, I think it shows us how far Saul truly had fallen away from God and God's grace. And it shows us the distance that he'd created between him, all through this envy. And at this point, Saul's opinion of David is completely clouded by the jealousy that he has for the relationship between David and God. He can't deal with it. He's too angry. He's too frustrated about it. So at this point, David could be doing anything, and Saul still wouldn't want it to be good. He's just so angry with him because of the envy in his eyes. He was green with envy. And interestingly, since verse 4, there's been no mention of Jonathan at this point, yet David is still going. He is still in favour, and he's still succeeding. You don't always have to be in the front line of someone's life to be that person that they need. Sometimes, little catch-ups. We've all got those friends that we cannot speak to for 3 months and then just pick up from where we left off. Sometimes you don't have to be the supporting role in someone's life. You just got to be there. You don't know the impact that's going to have on someone. You don't know the impact that that's going to have on their life. I know that there are many people throughout my life that wouldn't even know the impact they've had on me and have had such an impact to where I am now. Christian friendship, filial love, doesn't just keep us going and moving forward, but I firmly believe that that love, that friendship, is key to proper and correct discipleship, mentorship, and a thriving faith. You're not called just to leave people at the door. We're called to continue to disciple one another, to continue to mentor one another, and to continue to build up our brothers and sisters in Christ. One conversation isn't enough, whether you like it or not. You're going to have to keep talking to me. Sorry about that. And we're called as a church family to build one another up. We're called to check in. We're called to love one another, and we're called to not let people run away. Pull them back. They'll get annoyed with you, but they'll come back into church. You don't always have to be someone's best mate to help them out. But what you do have to do is show up, and you do have to try and have that relationship with them. Imagine the level of discipleship that must have been in Jonathan and David's life. That's like up here. That's like proper high tier there, isn't it? Imagine. I bet they were just sat there just constantly asking each other really holy questions while I'm sat here making risky decisions on the stage about what I talk about. And I just imagine that the level of discipleship and the things they talked about, I just would have loved to be a fly on the wall in one of their conversations. I found a quote which really resonated with me, and I'll share it again in this preach towards the end. And it's this. And it's by a guy called Dallas Willard. It says this: discipleship is the process of becoming who Jesus would be if he were you. Discipleship is the process of becoming who Jesus would be if he were you. I love this, and I think it sums up the strength and the importance of Jonathan and David's relationship. They literally bring one another closer to what Christ wants them to be. There would have been times where David couldn't have kept going, and Jonathan would have pulled him along, and there would have been times where Jonathan couldn't have kept going, and David would have, and vice versa, they would have pulled each other along. And I think this is kind of reinstating with me is that love is a restorative power, and that there is no doubt in my mind that if we can even replicate a small amount of the love that Christ has for us, then we're already winning. Even if we can just do the little bits to be better to one another. I've got to give the next bit of what I'm about to say, I've got to give the credit to Ellie, because she enlightened me on this, and actually everyone I've asked about this hymn, no one seems to know what it is. But there's a beautiful hymn called Brother, Sister, Let Me Serve You. And in verses 1 to 4 of that hymn it says this: Brother, sister, let me serve you, let me be as Christ to you. Pray that I may have the grace to let you be my servant too. We are pilgrims on the journey, we are companions on the road. We are here to help each other walk the mile and bear the load. I will hold the Christ-like for you in the night time of your fear. I will hold my hand out to you, speak the peace you long to hear. I will weep when you are weeping, when you laugh, I'll laugh with you. I will share your joy and sorrow till we've seen this journey through. How beautiful are those words. The first line of verse 3 says this: I will hold the Christ-like for you in the night time of your fear. When you can't go, I will pull you along. When you're done, I will be dragging you through. I will not let go of you. I will show you the friendship of Christ. I will show you feel of love. I will not let go of you, and I will be the thing that pulls you through if I need to. I am not letting you go. It does bring to mind the poem of The Footprints in the Sand. For those of us that have heard that before, and for those of us that hasn't, I'm going to read it again. Where in it, someone says to God, and he's talking to him, and he says, they're looking back on the life the person's had, and through the good times and through most of their life, they see two sets of footprints in the sand. And in all the good times, they always see two. But looking back on the bad times, they didn't see two, they only saw one set of footprints walking through the sand. And they turn to God and they ask, where were you in those times? And God says to them, those were the times I was carrying you. That's what we need to be doing for our brothers and sisters. If they can't do it because of where they're at, if their faith is dwindling, if they haven't got the strength, we've got to pick them up and bring them through. Our friendships are everything. We carry one another through good and bad times, and when we can't face the day, those are the friendships that will help us go in. I know there are millions of times that Jacob carried me through, and I hope that I did some of those for him. But also, I have to give credit to Pete. Believe it or not, Pete has done some good with me. And for those of you who don't know, before I started at Elevate, I'd left a previous church that I was working at, and there was a string of different things that had happened after that where I just was done with church. The leadership I'd come under just wasn't helping me. It wasn't helping me develop. It wasn't helping me grow. It was a friendship where it was almost felt like it was doing more harm than good, I couldn't see myself getting back in a pulpit and preaching for a while, to be honest, but credit to Pete and Adele. They came alongside Ellie and I, and they've really helped us, and they've helped us develop and grow. And even this week, Pete and I were talking about this and where Elevate's at now, and it's just been fantastic to be under that leadership. And I can truly say, I'm not hoping for a pay rise, don't worry, but Pete and Adele's leadership has really, really helped me flourish and actually move in the right direction. Along with some of the leadership team, but I won't give them too much credit. I don't want to get too much of a big head. I'm only joking. Last point. What does Fila love mean? And what does that mean that we have to do? We need to take these friendships and we need to go out. My dad often says to me, his ceiling is my floor. And I agree with that. I believe that. I think it's a good phrase. But I believe that these friendships that we have and these guiding, mentoring and discipling friendships, when we do those right, the heights we can go to are even higher. When we do it corporately or correctly with more than just ourselves and our friends, what happens is we build up traction, we build up momentum, and we're able to do more together and to push the ceiling of the church and Elevate and everything else further and get more reach because we're doing it correctly and we're doing it together. And when one of us struggles, we step in and help. But our mission as Christians is laid out very clearly through Matthew 28, 16 to 20. And so a lot of us would have known that, and it's the Great Commission where it says, "Then the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. Then Jesus came to them and said, 'All authority in heaven and earth has been given to you. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teach them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always, to the very end of the age.'" We don't need to worry about doing this by ourselves. Although we have a duty as a Christian to go out and share the good news, when we have these friendships and when we do these friendships well, we're not doing that by ourselves. We're able to do that with one another. Pushing the scope, pushing the ceiling, having a greater reach, enabling us to get more people and to help more people. The very last verse of chapter 18 from 1 Samuel says this: "Every time the Philistine commanders came out of battle, David was more successful than all of Saul's officers. So his name was in high esteem." He started from this low place. David has started from somewhere where he considers himself lowly. He finishes chapter 18 highly esteemed, the best in Saul's army, dominating, doing everything he needs. Yes, God was with him. Yes, David was obedient. But he achieved so much more because of that friendship with Jonathan. Jonathan meant that he achieved even more greatness in the face of an extremely difficult time. The love Jonathan showed David was immense. He set aside his birthright to see David thrive. Saul had been mucking about, not being the best king, and God had got to the point where he was so frustrated with him that he was literally saying to Saul, "Your heritage is done. You are not leading these people anymore. I need David." Jonathan listened to that. Imagine how tough that would have been. Imagine. Yeah, but it was my dad, it wasn't me. You can't blame me for that. This is what I'm saying. And he listens. He brings David up. He watches him thrive. And he does that in the face of his father, this is extremely unpleasing to. I want to finish with that quote again that says, "Discipleship is the process of who Jesus would be if he were you." But I want to change it slightly to this. Discipleship and sharing the good news is the process of becoming who Jesus would be if he were you. Don't just do one without the other. Do them together. Do them well. Bring them in, bring friends in, and watch them thrive. How do you need to be doing this? What can you be doing? What can you be doing to bring people in, to lifting them up, and to watching them do as God has planned for them and trying to do great things? Father, thank you so much for this evening. Thank you for the chance to try and share some of the stuff that you've been saying to me this week. And I pray that as we go out this week, you enable us to remember that these friendships, this feel of love that we have for one another, is so important for our development, is so important for our journey. Help us remember that when we can't walk, there are people around us that will carry us through. You are an immense Father. We thank you so much for being able to be in your house tonight. And as we move back into worship again, I pray that you help us remember the importance of those friendships in our lives. In your powerful and precious name, Lord. Amen.